Okay, welcome to the Mystical Mountain Podcast once again. Everybody who's tuning in, make sure to share the podcast. Today we've got a real interesting one, something I've been looking forward to for a while. We've got James Szubski. Is that how you say your name?
Szubski.
Szubski. Okay, James Szubski on the podcast. He's located down in the Columbia River Gorge area, southern Washington state. So a little bit about that area. In a landscape forged by fire and carved by cataclysm at a place flanked north and south by soaring glacier-clad sentinels, such as Mount Adams, Mount St. Helens, Mount Hood, and along the flow of an ancient and powerful energy current, there abides in a quiet and unassuming town one of the most unusual stores in the world, Margie's Outdoor Store, which James works at. Margie's Outdoor Store is no stranger to strange things. It is the only place in the gorge where you can file a paranormal report and not be judged. A giant illustrated map hangs on the wall and shows the locations of many reported supernatural encounters. Other exhibits provide deeper details on the unusual happenings in the territory. While you're there, you can pick up an exclusive arcane adventure map. They're the best guides to the region's most intriguing and mysterious paranormal hotspots. It's said that the boundaries between worlds has been worn thin in the Columbia River Gorge. Sightings of strange creatures are common. Odd lights often play in the skies, and time seems to flow in peculiar ways at particular locations. The feeling that there is something magical about this place is inescapable for anyone who spends time here. It's no wonder folks know this territory as the supernatural capital of the Pacific Northwest. And that, my friend, is quite a big claim there, because we've got some supernatural things going on. We got Mount Adams, we got strange disappearances everywhere, Mount Rainier, and even up here in the Pacific Northwest part of British Columbia, there's the hotspot David Paulides refers to, anywhere between Vancouver and Hope, and many strange stories. So James, thank you for coming on here, and maybe I'll let you give a little introduction to yourself.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Yeah. So the store is located in the Columbia River Gorge, and it was originally owned by my mother-in-law, and my wife and I were living in Seattle, and she passed away almost 3 years ago. And so my wife and I packed up and moved down and took over the family business. When I got there, I've got a pretty significant outdoor adventure background. I was a U.S. Army infantry soldier, a wildland forest firefighter, a mountain guide, and a search and rescue EMT. And so we changed the format of one of her. She had a number of businesses, and we changed the format of this store to be more of an outdoor store. I figured that was a business that I could knew enough about that I could run well. And right after we sort of started advertising as an outdoor adventure store, people started spontaneously coming in and telling us about really unusual experiences they were having in the wilderness areas. We were hearing stories about Sasquatch and UFOs and things even stranger than all that. So I was intensely curious and really interested in what was going on here. So we put up a big sign in the window, and it said, "File paranormal reports here." And I gave special instructions to the staff. I said, based on my military experience and some of my other experiences in the wilderness, I knew that there's a lot of times when the seemingly really strange experiences, there's a kernel of truth to what's going on there. And so I told the staff, we're going to treat everyone who walks in the door with respect. No matter how strange or unusual their story is, we're going to be a safe place for them to tell that story. We're not going to judge folks. We're going to ask intelligent follow-up questions. We're not going to impose what we believe they saw or they experienced on their story. We're just going to take in the data and see where it leads us. And so that the program really started, it's got to be close to probably a year, a little more than a year and a half ago, probably a year and 9 months or so. And we've had over 250 reports in that time. And so it has been uh, well, incredibly interesting, super fun. I mean, it's sort of like, every week, two or three new Scooby Doo mysteries walk through our door. And people, I think the most rewarding part about it is that folks often hold these stories for many years. And, they try to tell friends and neighbors about them, and they get nervous laughs or, outright ridicule. And for people to be believed, people to have a place where someone's going to engage with them and, really try to understand the experience that they had. It's a really wonderful moment of human connection. It's probably my favorite part about this whole program is that component of it. And so like I said, the stories are really fascinating. They're interesting. Some of them seem to have a paranormal aspect to that. And when I say paranormal, I mean things that science currently doesn't understand. It's sort of beyond what our paradigms or current scientific dogma allows. Some of them seem to be related to, real world phenomena. We've got this creature called the Klickitat Ape cat. It's basically a very large Black Panther like creature. Some reports say that it's 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder. There's a handful of reports. We've had maybe 80 reports in total now. And about half of them say that it's enormous, that it stands 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder. That's bigger than a tiger. So that's pretty mysterious. Of course, there's cougars out here, but according to wildlife experts, they're never supposed to have black fur. And then there's a handful of reports about this creature that say it has a face that looks like a monkey. And, as I dug into that, we definitely have some Native American traditions out here that seem to indicate folks have been encountering this being for a long, long time. But there's also a really good case to be made that it may have escaped from a government animal testing laboratory from the Hanford nuclear site upriver from us. And so there's a really interesting, perhaps scientific explanation for why this creature is here. So again, it's been really an amazing experience for me to sort of begin to uncover all this stuff and to hear these stories. And it's really a great joy to me to share them with folks like you, and to try to understand with people who got, who talk to more people and your audiences who may have had experience of their own, to sort of start to triangulate on some of these really amazing phenomenon that we're experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting what you said about the Klickitat ape cat, and how there's also stories about this going back a long time. So it's not necessarily just a brand new phenomenon people have seen in recent years, but you say the local Native Americans have spoken about it too, which I find pretty interesting. I feel like, when stories go back hundreds or thousands of years, it definitely lends some credence to the whole entire thing. The Klickitat ape cat, how often would you say you've heard about somebody seeing that, yearly, let's say, since you've been doing it, or from the stories you've heard before?
Yeah. So I hear about someone comes in and talks about the ape cat at least once a week. It's pretty much what we hear. So the origin of these stories, and why we call it the ape cat, really stems from the very first report that I received. And but before I get into that, I want to sort of set the scene for where these reports are happening.
Yeah.
And so I talk a little bit about the Columbia River Gorge itself, and paint for your listeners a sort of an idea of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Good idea.
So the gorge is the Columbia River flows through the Cascade Mountains, and so it is the only sea level passage through those mountains. And the Columbia River is the largest river in North and South America that flows into the Pacific. So that river's been here for between, depending on which geologist you talk to, anywhere from 20 to 40 million years. So it is an extremely well-established energy flow moving through the landscape. It was literally here before the mountains were here. And there have been a number of geological processes that have created an 80-mile long gorge. And so you can go from sea level to 3,000 feet in less than half a mile. There are on the river forms the border between Washington State and Oregon State. And my store is about 60 miles east of Portland, Oregon, just to give you a sense of where it is geographically. Within 45 miles of the store, there are 3 stratovolcanoes. So we've got Mount Adams, which is what's shown behind you on your screen, very famous for numerous UFO encounters. There's Mount Hood on the Oregon side, which is very famous for Sasquatch sightings and reports. And then there's Mount St. Helens, which famously erupted in the 1980s. So very interesting volcanic activity. Some of these volcanoes were erupting less than 8,000 years ago. And St. Helens erupted, in the 1980s. We still have earthquakes on top of Mount Hood. Just last week, we were getting reports of that. Very geologically active area. And on the Oregon side alone, there are more than 90 named waterfalls. Some of them are 600 feet tall. We've got caves throughout the area. The mountains themselves form a rain shadow. So basically the west side of the gorge is a Pacific Northwest rainforest, and the east side is a stunningly beautiful desert. About probably 15 million years ago, an enormous fissure opened in the earth near the Washington-Idaho border, 97 miles long, and tremendous volumes of lava started spraying out of it. It's basically like the Kilauea volcanoes, but times 10,000. And it began spilling lava over Washington State, running through the ancient, gentle Columbia River Valley and filling it up. Eventually, it ran 300 miles all the way to the ocean. And just to give folks a sense of scope and scale, so much lava came out of these fissures that if you spread it out evenly over the entire lower 48 states in the United States, it would bury the entire lower 48 states in 60 feet of lava.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's just massive. Well, these flows didn't all happen at one time. They're separated sometimes by hundreds of thousands of years. And so we've got this sort of layer cake formation going on in the gorge, and you can drive and you'll see these different stacks of volcanic rock in layers on these cliff walls. Each one of those flows, as it cooled, its magnetic material inside the rock oriented towards the Earth's magnetic north at that time, locked it in place. And then the next flow would come maybe 1,000 years later, and the Earth's magnetic pole wanders, and so it will lock it in a new position. In the last 100 years, the magnetic North Pole has moved 700 miles. So basically, every single layer of this massive volcanic complex has got a different magnetic signature, and it makes for a really complex and intricate electromagnetic environment here. So you've got that astonishing, and that's that apocalypse by fire. Literally trillions of gallons of lava flowed over this place. Then we had the mountains rise, and then 15,000 years ago, we had the Younger Dryas floods. And so some people have heard maybe Randall Carlson or Graham Hancock talk about these enormous floods that happened. Basically, the current thinking is that they started in Missoula, Montana. Some kind of glacial dam broke during the Ice Age, and a flood ravaged over eastern Washington. It was so great that it was equal to all of the rivers on Earth combined times 10. And so it was an epic biblical flood. It sort of got trapped at a geologic feature called the Wallula Gap at the east end of the gorge, and then rocketed down the gorge carrying icebergs and rock and tree and debris, and everything that was in the landscape got washed down the gorge. In some places, it was over 1,000 feet deep and moving at 60 to 70 miles an hour. And so it scoured all of the topsoil and everything off of those layers of rock, created these, like I said, stunningly beautiful cliffs and interesting geologic features, and then washed out into the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that electromagnetic complexity in those layers was then exposed, and it's now sort of like a live wire just sitting there. And then in the modern era, there are now, I think, 14 hydroelectric dams on the Columbia River, provides 44% of all the hydroelectric power in the United States. And so
Wow.
the area is crisscrossed with high power transmission lines. And again, when you add all these factors, you've got active volcanoes with a strong vertical pushing force. You've got the river with a horizontal pushing force. You've got this electromagnetic stuff going on with the rocks. You've got the hydro dams going on. All of it creates a really unique electromagnetic environment. And one of my leading theories is that's one of the reasons why we have so much paranormal activity down here. It's because there is this unique environment. So all that sort of is setting the stage for this stunningly beautiful, so beautiful, in fact, that the U.S. Congress created a new law and designated it as the nation's first national scenic area, which gives it many protections like you'd find in a national park, but people can live and work here. And so that's the big distinction. But there's a lot of limits on what kind of development can happen here. So its beauty is maintained. But I live in a town in Stevenson, which is on the rainforest side, and the store is just at the edge of the desert side. It's about a 25-minute drive for me. And every day I'm just awestruck by how stunningly beautiful it is to be here. And so again, that's sort of giving folks an idea of the location that we're talking about. Really unique, really unusual. There's no place like it on Earth anywhere else. And this is where all of these reports are coming from. So you had talked about Mount Adams. Like, I consider Mount Adams part of the gorge features. It's sort of defining the northern edge of the gorge, is the way I look at it. And then Mount Hood is defining the southern edge of the gorge. 80 miles long, and just an incredible place, especially for an adventure guy like me. Like, you can't get better. Rock climbing, mountaineering, paragliding, whitewater rafting, you name it, it's all here. So this ape cat, I was working in the store. We were getting ready to close. A gentleman came in, and he knew my mother-in-law. She had helped his family out. Margie was a fairly sophisticated pharmacist, registered in 4 different states, really knew her stuff. His mother was having some kind of medical issue, and she had helped them out. And so he's kind of a friend of the family, but I hadn't met him before. And it took him 45 minutes to work up the courage to tell his story, but he was orienteering near Buck Creek. It was about 4 or 5 miles from the store. And so map and compass work. His compass was acting strange. In itself, not unusual. The gorge, because of all that crazy electromagnetic stuff, when you look at our navigational maps published by the government, bright pink letters say, warning, your magnetic compass readings will be off in this area. So it's not uncommon to have strange magnetic stuff. A little bit strange to have it, in a handheld thing as you're moving, but you never know. Shortly thereafter, he looks up across the creek and he sees this enormous black cat. And so this is my first hearing of it. And he describes this very large, very muscular cat. And it's standing 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder, watching him. So being, sort of having spent a lot of time in the outdoors, there's a couple of flags coming up for me, telling me that this is not a normal creature. One, we don't have wildlife professionals say there's no such thing as a black cougar. It's not recognized by science. So of course we have cougars here, but when their fur darkens, it goes from a tawny tan color to a more reddish color. Never supposed to go black. So he's describing a black cat, something that I know shouldn't exist here. He also said that he's watching it for 4 to 5 minutes. He has this really lengthy encounter, and cougars will abandon a fresh kill at the sound of human voices. And so they're very skittish. Any kind of cougar that's going to actually stand in the presence of a human being and not flee immediately, that's another something unusual is going on, kind of a point. So we've got the large size, we've got its black fur. Normal cougars only stand, maybe the big ones are 24 inches at the shoulder. To be 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder, that's larger than a tiger. And a tiger is the largest cat known to exist on the planet currently. There's only one creature in the fossil record that matches that size, and it was an Ice Age cat called the American lion. Its scientific name was the Panther atrox. They found many, many skeletons of this creature, 80 alone in the La Brea tar pits down in California. And this was a cat that, based on the fossil record, they know was over 1,000 pounds, and it had the largest brain capacity of any cat that ever lived. And absolutely, its range was part of Washington State, was where it lived, 9,000, 10,000 years ago, when it was said to have gone extinct. But no creature is supposed to be that big. No cat is supposed to be that big today.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to run into that while hiking.
Oh, I know, right? And you can imagine, I'm listening, and I've heard Sasquatch stories at this point. I've heard UFO stories. I've heard other strange things, little people, lights in the sky, orbs. But this cat thing is really fascinating to me. And he continues with his story. Had a long fur that was 4 to 5 inches long. Again, very unusual. And I'm just soaking in the information, trying to ask follow-up questions. And he sort of gets to the end of his story, and he says, and the strangest thing, James, is that it had a face, I swear to God, that looked like a monkey. And I was kind of taken aback, and I asked for more details. He said that it had intelligent ape-like eyes, and it had other primate features. Some of those features I never talk about in interviews because it's sort of my check to see, if other people come with stories, if it's sort of this, they can match up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he sort of concluded his tale, and then he left. And I was just dumbfounded. It's one report, right? And so you're not going to jump to the sudden belief that it's absolutely, there could be 100 different things. He could be making it up. He could, have misreported it. Who knows what it is? But still, a lot of credible things there for me. His reluctance to tell the story to begin with, his family connection, some of the ways he was communicating. It was clear to me that he didn't seem like he was, having fun, making up a story. And so in my mind, and for me personally, it was a very believable story that he had this strange experience, and it just doesn't have any analog to anything that I was aware of at the time. Well, the next day, I was really excited about it, and I was talking to my employees, and one of them, Missy, she started shaking. She was clearly emotionally impacted just to hear the description of this creature. And I asked her what was going on, and she said, James, I've seen that thing myself. She lives on the desert side. She was driving down to Klickitat Canyon at dawn, and she saw this creature on the side of the road, and it was walking along. Big cat, black cat with a long black tail. She didn't get a look at its face. She stopped her car to watch it. There's no doubt in her mind that she was seeing a cat, a big black cat. She watched it. I think she says that it walked into a small patch of tall grass, and she never saw it come out the other side. She eventually got out of her car to look for it, didn't see any more evidence of it. She wondered if she should warn the people who had houses in that area that there's this big black predator cat. She decided against that, and it's kind of a good thing she did, because when she told her family about it, they didn't believe her. They suggested that maybe she'd seen a cow. And right there, that sort of gives you a sense of like how big of a creature she was describing, but every grown adult knows the difference between a cow and a cat, and to even suggest that you mistook one for the other is kind of crazy. So at that point, Missy, is an employee that I have, not one prone to telling tall tales, clearly having an emotional reaction to it. So I thought, I really want to know more about this. I want to see if anyone else has seen this thing. In 2 days, I'd had 2 reports. So the store has a radio advertising budget. We put up some ads on the radio asking if anyone has seen a large black cat to please come report it at the store. I've tacked up some flyers at some of our local trailheads, describing the creature and asking people to bring in any first or secondhand stories. And things kind of took off from there. We've had more than 80 reports now, and
Wow.
some of them are from senior law enforcement officials. And so in my mind, in fact, this July, a woman who lives in the western part of the gorge on the Washington side posted a video of the cat to her community Facebook page.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and I've contacted her several times to try to get permission to use her film, but I have been unsuccessful in getting a hold of her. But I've shown it to many people on my phone, and of course it's kind of distant, and Facebook kind of degrades the quality of the image. But she's not the only one that people have told us that they've captured video of it, and I'm getting ready to offer a reward for anyone who can bring in authentic footage of the creature. But as far as I'm concerned, I've had so many reports from so many credible people that there's absolutely a large muscular cat roaming around in Klickitat County, which is where the store is located. So
Yeah.
the name Klickitat Ape Cat comes from the county we're in, Klickitat, and this description of this ape-like face, and the fact that it's a big black cat.
It really goes to show you just how many stories there are out there that people have that you never hear about, because they don't share it, or they don't
Mm-hmm.
share, or they share it with one person or something like that. But I find the same thing when it comes to like Sasquatch. I'll talk to random people, especially in smaller towns, like by Harrison Hot Springs up here, or anywhere, and you'd be surprised how many people have a story, or like somebody they know has a story that they swear by or something like that. And it's not just with Sasquatch, it's with some of these other creatures too, like the one you're talking about right now. And I really believe that there's there's got to be something going on, because yeah, I also refuse to believe that almost everybody is mistaking a cat for a cow, or mistaking a Sasquatch for a bear when they're walking like a human upright. It's just like, let's just get over it already. I mean, these stories have been around for hundreds of thousands of years as well, going back
Mm-hmm.
such a long time. So I don't doubt that at all. It's interesting how you mentioned the like kind of electromagnetic anomalies and action that is going on in that area where you are at the Columbia River Gorge. And that kind of stuff seems to be sometimes a common denominator for strange phenomena. Like if you look at the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, or Mount Shasta, of course, being
Mm-hmm.
like ground zero for this stuff, or Mount Adams being ground zero for this kind of stuff. Um, volcanoes seem to attract a lot of very odd things, it seems like. And that's not to say that all the other wilderness areas don't have strange things going on also where there aren't volcanoes, because they do.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like these places like Mount Adams and Mount Shasta, disappearances around Rainier, and probably other volcanoes, seem to have so many strange stories around them. It really makes me wonder, like where you are by Adams, or with the Columbia River Gorge, same area, uh, is the electromagnetic stuff, or any other sort of energies that aren't electromagnetic just playing a part with these things? Like, are we seeing glimpses of creatures in other dimensions, or are we seeing glimpses of the past, when some of these things used to be here? Are they walking between realms? Like, it really makes you wonder what's going on with that. Do you have, I mean, I know you mentioned the electromagnetic stuff and whatnot. Do you have any other theories as to why these things are?
Well, I thought a lot about things exactly like you're saying. There was a Dr. Michael Persinger. He was Laurentide University over there in Ontario, Canada. And during the 80s and 90s, he did a lot of studies with manipulating magnetic fields around the brain. So he was a neuroscientist, and his credentials are unimpeachable. And his science is incredibly well documented, repeatable. Um, and so he's definitely not a woo woo fringe scientist. Like, he was doing real work. What he discovered was that he created a thing that they eventually came to call the God helmet. And it's basically a motorcycle helmet with some solenoids on it. And it allowed them to subtly manipulate magnetic fields around the human brain. And when they did that, people had extraordinary perceptions. And so some folks would very commonly have a sensed presence. So they would believe that there was another entity nearby them. For a handful of the people, they claim to have seen God, and hence the name, the God helmet. But what was very clear in his work is that magnetic fields, and not even, it doesn't even have to be very strong. It has to be, the message within that field has to be complex and nuanced, are able to induce non-standard perceptions for people. And so there's real science behind the notion that, I think maybe the way that I think about it is like this: like, we all accept the fact that there are phenomena that our senses aren't geared to pick up. So we can't see ultraviolet light or infrared light. There are sounds our dogs can hear that we can't hear. There's numerous phenomena that just are unavailable to our human sensory apparatus, right? And so, and we also are socially conditioned to perceive things in certain ways. Well, what I think is happening, is that these magnetic fields shift your channel. So, like, you think about a radio station, you can tune into one station, move the dial slightly, and you get a completely different information, completely different radio program, just by slightly adjusting the dial and tuning your perceptive capabilities to a slightly different channel. And it can go from classical music to, metal rock, all through just a subtle manipulation of the tuning. Well, what I think is happening out here is that we are, due through a combination of the geology and the electromagnetic environment here, and what's happening with the sun, solar weather, and its impact on our magnetosphere, maybe even, what you ate that morning, if it's high in potassium or magnesium or some type of thing, it shifts the channel that you perceive, and you're able to see things that are, and you could call it another dimension, but outside of the realm of our normal perceptive capabilities, and now you're able to perceive it. And one of the most interesting stories about that, so Dr. Persinger found that by creating a certain type of manipulation, he could turn on fear within a person just like that, like flipping a switch. It wasn't like it built up, like something scary was happening, and then you found yourself built into the experience of fear. It's like, nope, suddenly you turn this thing on, you're in terror, change the signal, and you're out of terror. Like,
Well,
and it
I'm sure
turns off.
militaries would love to weaponize that one.
So we had a story. This was on Underwood Mountain, again, about 4 or 5 miles west of the store. And so Underwood Mountain is one of these more recent volcanic things. It's taken those layers of all that magnetic material and bent it up into a mountain. And there was a guy who lived up there, and he was saw these two glowing orbs in the sky near his farm, and they were sort of doing this sort of leapfrog dance over each other. He reports that they descended into his field and turned into a set of eyes, glowing eyes that approached him. And then, like a switch was thrown, he was experiencing intense fear. He ran into his house and grabbed a shotgun. And when he came out, the phenomenon had ended. Now, I'm going to share my screen and show you two other phenomenon that happened near Underwood Mountain. So the first is, hold on here. Let me take a look at what I've got.
I need to hike this mountain.
Yeah. So here we go. So this was a picture that was sent to the store, and someone took it from 12 miles away of Underwood Mountain. We got this, the picture's taken in February. We got it submitted in March. And they said, I was going through these pictures and I saw this strange thing. So we did some photo analysis on it. This is the original with the red circle. We enhanced it, blew it up, took a couple of different looks at it with different filters. And it looks, to my eyes, like one of the Tic Tac shaped UFOs that the U.S. Navy fighter jets are picking up on their gun cameras. And for me, this is inconclusive. I mean, there are obviously no wings or rotors on this thing. It's taken from 12 miles away. We're dealing with a very limited number of pixels to begin with. But it, to me, is clearly not a lenticular cloud. Being a mountaineer and a mountain guide, I know what those are. This is not that. Not an airplane, not a chopper. I've flown in both of those things on missions, both in search and rescue and firefighting and in the military. This is not a Black Hawk. This is not a Chinook helicopter. This is something else. Point is, it's right on top of Underwood Mountain. All right. The next picture I'm going to show you, I took myself. This is at the base of Underwood Mountain. And so I'm at the river level. And it shows a blue glowing orb.
Wow, look at that.
Now, I was taking pictures of this odd beam of light. So there's this singular beam of light coming down from the sky. And that was what captured my attention and the reason why I was taking photographs. Pictures from 2 seconds before don't show this blue glowing orb. Now, I have taken pictures and they have come back with a lens flare. And this is not a lens flare. So I have used Photoshop professionally since the year that it came out. And truthfully, I could easily have faked this. Like, this is one that is not impossible. You know, you're just manipulating pixels. But I know that it's not fake because I took it myself.
Did you see it with your eye as well?
So not in this particular case. Now, my wife and I driving, the road next to it is Highway 14, and we have seen them with our naked eye. All right. So, but the reason why we know this isn't a lens flare is because there's film grain in the image, and a lens flare is right next to the photoreceptor element. And so there's no film grain in a normal lens flare. Also, lens flares are typically perfectly circular. They're usually monochromatic. And so you don't have this modeling and this sort of texturing inside of the orb itself. We know it's not.
For those listening, sorry, I was going to say for those listening on the podcast apps and not on YouTube, it's right along the gorge here. Am I right? And it's like a almost like a turquoise looking orb that has some light emanating from within it and a little bit of greenish light on the outside of it, just maybe 20 feet above the water. Yeah.
And, you know, we see car headlights on the road here. And so it's clearly not some type of, you know, headlight reflecting through some mist or something like that. This is a unique phenomenon. Again, so what's interesting to me is that if you drew a line from this orb phenomenon to where that report with the glowing eyes and the sudden switching on of fear to that UFO, it is basically climbing a ladder up Underwood Mountain. And this is an area which is, you know, under intense geological stresses. And so there could be all kinds of piezoelectric effects going on, things like that. So on the one hand, you could say, okay, so this individual who saw the glowing eyes and had his fear switched on just like Michael Persinger was able to do. Like that's a mental process that's going on in his own head, and nothing more should be thought about it because it's just a hacking the brain, right? But then here we have photographic evidence, so something that's captured on film in that exact same area. So this can't be something that's in my brain. Like this can't be a James specific phenomenon because we have mechanical devices that are capturing it. And the same thing with that UFO picture. And so that's what leads me to believe that there is these electromagnetic effects are somehow thinning a veil between dimensions or worlds, or you choose your term for it, right? But there's something going on here. And we get so many reports, and some of them are just like really random one-offs. My daughter, I had my 4x4 vehicle. And so I've got a old FJ Cruiser that I've modified and put a bunch of cameras on, and it's, sort of set to go looking for cryptids in the wilderness. So the whole family was in the rig, and we were driving on some dirt roads near our home. And I pulled off to let another vehicle go by, and she could see out the window. And she said, "Oh, I see a big snake out there." And she described this snake as having frills on the side of its head, sort of like, like little, almost like webbed wing type things. And she described the color that it was fading from red to yellow, and described the length of the snake. And none of us could see it. And we had sort of taken off by the time she was excitedly talking about it. She's 9 years old, right? Mm-hmm. And for her, she's simply like, we see wildlife all the time, turkey, deer, bear, you name it. And she's just reporting another one of the creatures that she saw outside of the window of the car. Well, you do the research, there are no frilled snakes in North America. There are no frilled lizards in North America.
Yeah.
And so she is seeing something clear as day, child's report. And I've asked her many times, her story stays consistent. Something that is just a kind of a one-off cryptid, a frilled 3-foot long snake in the Pacific Northwest. I've had stories of strange, like hairless dog-like creatures that can whistle and that are the size of Great Danes, but clearly not dogs themselves. 20-foot tall, hairy creatures. 20. Strange. Yeah. Another
like
one of my
mountain giants.
Yeah.
Like I've heard of only a handful of stories of that size, because usually the Sasquatch don't get too much bigger than 10 or 12 feet.
Yeah, exactly. And I asked this particular witness, was it a Sasquatch? He said, "Oh, no, it was not a Sasquatch. It was something else." Another one of my employees was driving through the desert, and it was it was after midnight, and on his way home, and he saw a bipedal humanoid creature that was no more than 2 or 3 feet tall, very skinny, on the side of the road. Again, this is in the desert side, so maybe 15, 20 minutes east of the store. And he only caught it in the headlights for a few seconds, but he said that it had a head that looks like a praying mantis. And so up on the screen right now is we worked with one of those AI art generators, and I went through a bunch of iterations with him until we got one that was close to what he had observed. And so he drove past this thing, and the lights in the center console of his car all went dark, and his phone started going crazy, alarms and things started going off on it.
Classic.
He got, a few 100 yards down the road, and then he started feeling dizzy and sick and had to pull over. He knows that I'm super interested in stuff, and so he thought maybe I should go back and check it out to give James a full report. And then he said, "Heck no, I'm not doing that." So anyway, the point is that not only do we have like the classics of Sasquatch and UFOs and things like that, but we also have this strange collection of sort of one-off cryptids. And I'm beginning to think that this might be some kind of interdimensional crossroads, or some kind of thing where things pass through. And again, we're still gathering data, and I don't know, and I'm just trying to come up with some working theories. But
Yeah.
It's just an amazing place.
Well, when I was at the Isetti Ranch, which I think you're
Hmm.
familiar with,
Yeah, yeah.
probably up in Trout Lake there, just south of Mount Adams. I guess that was 2 years ago now. Wow, I got to go back. But so for those who don't know, Isetti Ranch is a place owned by what's his name?
Yellowland.
James Gilliland, yeah, and I think he has his own show or something. But he's got a ranch there, and people can go there and camp in their tents, or they can stay in a couple of the buildings there and whatnot. And the place is renowned for UFO sightings and other strange phenomena, Sasquatch and other encounters. And I was out there at night doing their little viewing they do every night, and people were pointing the green lasers up at Mount Adams, trying to point some stuff out. And when they weren't doing that, I was noticing something at about 9,000 feet on the mountain, roughly 9,000 feet. It's a 12,000 foot mountain. So it's really high up there, up in the glaciated kind of area, or where there would be snow, like usually, very high up. This is in the summer, but anyways, I thought I saw something very, very faint. I have pretty good eyes. And then I borrowed one of the guy's green laser pens to show him where I was looking at. And almost right after I lit up or pointed at that part of the mountain with this green laser pen, one of those ultra powered ones, this like flash, this light, this thing just powered up like whoosh, like on the mountain at like 9,000 feet. I looked at it on Google Earth after and stuff, and I confirmed that, there's no Forest Service road where I was pointing the laser pen. There's no road. It's not even on a route where people would go to summit the mountain. It's like on the front of it and stuff from where I was looking at. And that was weird. And then I saw a second one appear to the right of that light, and they kind of gravitated a little bit towards each other, and then they dimmed out. And I was like, holy crap. Like, okay, I believe there's stuff going on here, I wasn't sure at first, but I figured it
Yep.
probably true. But I saw something for myself, firsthand experience. So I mean, I can vouch a little bit for Mount Adams and some of the stuff that goes on there, but people have seen things a lot crazier than that. But I just found that really fascinating. And this was nobody's headlamp on a mountain, and
Yeah.
nor would they be in that section of the mountain, and there would be no vehicles up there. And plus, even if it was, this light was way bigger and more powerful than any headlamp would look like 5, 6 miles away or whatever I was at. But the other thing I was going to say regarding what you mentioned earlier about how maybe the veil's thin, or we're getting a glimpse into another dimension, or it being some sort of electromagnetic effect on our brain when people are seeing some of these beings and creatures like the Klickitat ape cat and whatnot, is that part of what I can't make sense of with that is that so often when people are having these encounters, these creatures, for lack of a better word, are they're interacting physically with our
Hmm.
physical world. They are moving our grass. They are,
Throwing rocks.
breaking branches, throwing rocks. So at least in some of the cases, I can't really see how it's just like, maybe a trick of the mind, or we're seeing something into another realm, because they seem to very much be in our realm.
Hmm.
So I'm kind of wondering maybe what you make of that.
Yeah, we've had folks come in with hair samples. We've had stories of rocks being thrown. Um, and so it can't be just a mental phenomena. Like that's after like I said, close to 250 reports. Um, you know, First of all, just forget the idea that everyone is lying or making it up, right? Like that's a ridiculous notion. That there's this many people coming in with these really unusual experiences, and all just this a town entirely populated by liars. That doesn't pass the smell test at all. And so then you've got people who are maybe having really unusual experiences, but the same token, we get photographic evidence, we get footprints, we get hair samples, we get rocks thrown. Very common. That's a story we hear a lot. And so there's clearly some type of thing. I've imagined it a couple of different ways. One is that either they're wandering into our physical world, they're not native to here, but they wander into our world, or we inadvertently wander into their world, which is a parallel, similar world. But I think that door goes both ways. We've had stories of folks who report missing time in certain areas, and again, those are the kind of things that feel to me like there's a sort of exchange going on, that there's a wandering back and forth between those two realms.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So for my, based on what I'm hearing and the reports that we're getting, I'm really of the mind that they are, for lack of a better word, their home realm is not the physical world that we experience every day, but they have the ability to enter our world. Even so, this guy who has seen them dozens of times, Sasquatch, I should say, he's come to the store, he's shown us hair samples. They apparently travel through his property frequently, and he's seen young ones and old ones, some 14 feet tall.
Wow.
I said, so what is your assessment? Is this an animal? Is this a biological creature, or is it something supernatural? Oh, it's a biological creature, 100%. And later on in that same story, he'll say, and they seem to have the limited teleportation abilities. And I'm like, well, I don't know of any deer that can do that. And but his description was they seem to be able to, if they're moving away from you, they can like jump 50 yards in half a second. And so like to him, that was, how he described this teleportation capability.
Yeah,
So
that makes you wonder, do they actually have the ability to leap 50 feet or move 50 feet in a single second? Or are we seeing some sort of like glitch in the matrix or something, so to speak?
interesting that you use that word. So that 20-foot tall hairy creature that was, according to the witness, not a Sasquatch, was seen in between an orchard and an airstrip in the desert side, very close to where my employee saw that mantis head humanoid thing. And she said it seemed like it was glitching across the road.
Really?
Yeah. And so she used that term, glitching. And, so again, I'm trying to come up with different theories. Michael Persinger, I think, is giving us a piece of the puzzle, by helping us understand that it's not necessarily the strength of the magnetic field. It is the content of the magnetic field. It's sort of the difference between just a loud noise and someone whispering, you're, watch out, And so like, it's the content of the message, not the strength of the message, the content of the signal that you're getting from that magnetic field that makes the difference. But again, our brains are pretty much just geared for survival in this world. And even if it is, someone says, oh, it's just a hallucination. Well, when people all over the world in different time eras are hallucinating the same thing from a similar stimulus, there has to be evolutionary advantage to that. Like, you don't share a perceptive response unless evolution is creating, unless there's a survival advantage to that, right? And so that's what makes me think that there's a deeper reality. Like, even if it is a mental effect, because so many people are having the same mental effect, Sasquatch, like looking like creatures or whatever, just saying it's a hallucination with a hand wave does not account for the phenomenon. Like that you haven't explained anything. All you've done is come up with a word that has no explanatory value. So anyway, that's that's sort of how I'm trying to make sense of some of these things and understand what's really going on here.
Yeah, and like I've heard stories before about these mountain giants. Not too many, like things that are a lot bigger than Bigfoot, Sasquatch. And I think it would be really difficult to hide 20-foot beings, probably. I could be wrong, but
Mm-hmm.
if they were actually living out there in the forest, in the wilderness of Washington or Oregon or wherever, anywhere. It would be so hard for them to hide at that height, especially now. You'd think with drones and whatnot. And of course, we would think it would be hard for Sasquatch to do that too, but they seem to manage. But with something like that, like a 20-foot tall being, to me, that when people are seeing that, that really screams to me. And because there's been so many sightings, I don't necessarily think they're all lying or they're making it up or whatever. It's the same thing with all these cryptids. I don't think people are lying about this for the most part. But when it's 20 feet tall, that to me really screams like, it's going in and out of where we are or something.
Mhm.
I mean, how could it not be something like that if it's that big? And
Yeah.
people are generally like, those are really rare sightings. Like, people aren't really seeing this thing very often around the area. And it's especially strange when they appear in more desert like areas, like you said, the east side of the Cascades,
Mhm.
or even something like a Bigfoot down in Arizona or something like that, where there's no tree coverage. Like, where are these things hiding? Like,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
there not to be something a bit more supernatural about this, I think would almost be impossible.
Yeah. Well, you go to um, the European cave paintings, Lascaux, France, and some of those places. These are the oldest records of human thought, 40,000 years old. And they all depict impossible creatures, human animal hybrids, things that can't possibly be biological animals based on our understanding of the world. But yet they're there. Our first record of thought. This phenomenon has been with human beings since as long as we've been thinking human beings and sharing our thoughts. Every continent where people have lived, every culture, every time era is talking about and representing in their art things that are biologically impossible. And so the notion, like, you can either, you know, be an arrogant teenager type of attitude and say, everyone else in history are idiots and I'm the only one who knows what's going on here. Or you can have maybe a more wise approach and say, well, we may not have figured everything else out yet, and there's still some mysteries to be solved. And you're right. I mean, so like the Cascade mountain range, 80,000 square miles, roughly equivalent to the size of the 10 smallest states in the United States combined. Rugged wilderness, like, you could hide pretty well in there. There are places, having done search and rescue and having had to find people, or oftentimes we would do evidence searches where we're looking for the remains of victims or weapons or things like that. Searches, like, they are really time consuming and very difficult to do. And so it's conceivable. And not only that, like, when I was a soldier, an infantry soldier, like, we could hide an entire platoon, in a 50, 100 by 100 foot vegetated area. And you could walk nearly on top of us and you wouldn't see us. And we just worked in the woods. We didn't live there. These
Mm-hmm.
creatures, their whole survival is based on not being seen. And so it's conceivable that you could have some large creatures out there, but 20 feet tall, that's a hard one to do.
Yeah, and that's what I think. Like, I think it's totally conceivable that Sasquatch at 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 feet uh, could definitely hide very easily, especially in the western side of the Cascades and the rainforests, and or the Rocky Mountains or wherever, coastal
Mhm.
mountains. But yeah, when it gets to 20 feet, and then when it gets to desert areas, then it
Yeah.
becomes more hard to believe how the hell they can hide like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, exactly. And, but here's a really interesting way to think about it. So, when you talk to Native Americans, and they talk about things being in the spirit realm, right? So here's something that, and how can that be? Like, how can there be a world that is persistent and consistent and multiple people can visit it and have the same experiences there, same type of terrain, but yet you could look all over the physical world and you don't find it. But if you think about a video game like Red Dead Redemption or, Skyrim or any of these kind of things, It is a persistent, consistent world. You can enter it from multiple points and it's got, the same geography for everyone who enters that world. And if you were to take, like, say it came on a CD disc and you crushed up that CD disc and you looked at every molecule of that CD disc, you wouldn't find any of the characters, you wouldn't find any of the locations, you wouldn't find any of the places. Basically, that whole world is just information and energy, and then you just need a tool or an apparatus that allows you to perceive it. And so, when we talk about like the Klickitat Ape cat, there are petroglyphs here in really close to the store, like maybe 20 minutes away. And they look like a cat in water. And what's really interesting about that is that, so there is a story amongst Native Americans about a race of supernatural panther protector creatures, and they come from the underwater realm. And they're called the Meshepeshu. And as I was researching, trying to figure out what's going on with these cats that we have here in Klickitat County, one of the descriptions I read of the Meshepeshu is that it looks like a black panther with the face of a man. And for my money, that's a pretty close description to a cat that's got an ape-like face, right?
And sorry, does that legend, does that, or whatever you want to call it, does that come from your area also?
So the term Meshepeshu comes from the Great Lakes area. And again, when the Native Americans talk about an underwater creature or something coming from the sky realm or from the earth realm, they're talking about something that's got a foot in both worlds. Well, up on the screen right now, I've got a picture of a petroglyph near a place called Horse Thief Lake, 20 minutes from the store. And it looks very much like a cat-like, human-like face with wavy water lines under its head. And there's a giant crack going through the water lines. Interestingly, so this whole Horse Thief Lake area was carved out by those giant floods. And there's a mesa, like a classic desert flat top mesa, steep walls, called Horse Thief Butte, just beyond the lake. I was there at dusk one night, and I saw this enormous creature swimming in the lake. I could tell how big it was because there was ducks and other waterfowl in the lake. It was bigger than a man, but smaller than a car, dark in color. I was about 500 or 600 yards away, so I couldn't really get a good look at it. I was in the desert mesa. So Horse Thief Butte is basically, like I said, a standard classic desert mesa. But when you get up into it, it is riddled with a labyrinth of hidden passageways and amphitheaters. There's petroglyphs on the walls. You can sort of climb onto the top of it and see the whole span of the Columbia River. And you can see down into the lake. And I saw this creature swimming down there. It would submerge for 5 minutes, come back up, was sort of patrolling the center. And this is before we had many paranormal reports, hadn't heard anything about a big cat. So that wasn't on my mind. But as I looked at it, I thought, gee, what the heck is that thing? It can't be a bear, because bears are point-to-point swimmers. They don't submerge. Can't be an elk. Like those are the only creatures big enough around here to be of that size. But and at the time, I just chalked it up. Well, I don't know what it was, but it was weird. Well, a straight line from Horse Thief Butte, filled with petroglyphs, to Horse Thief Lake, where I saw this thing, to that image I just had up on the screen of that cat. It's a straight line. And so the notion that we've got these, beings out here, that those petroglyphs are at least 1,000 years old, could be much, much older than that. We don't really know.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So again, with these sort of firsthand experiences, like you said, when you saw those lights up on Mount Adams, it's hard to deny what you see what you experience firsthand. And sure, anyone could look at that picture of the orb and say, James faked it. And okay, well, there's no way I'm going to prove it to you one way or the other. But you come down to the gorge, you spend any amount of time here, just like you did when you went to Mount Adams, and you start having these firsthand experiences, and you start looking for answers. And and I think that's the thing that is the most joyful to me, is like, this is a place where there are still mysteries, where it's still there are things that are unknown. and there's still places and phenomenon to explore that, to me, that's the joy of the whole thing.
I'll tell you one thing that was freaking me out when I camped overnight at Mount Adams once, on the north side. There's an incredibly beautiful turquoise glacial lake up there, high at like way above the tree line, on the north side. Just spectacular place to camp. Kind of a little tough to get to, just all volcanic rock that's kind of tough to walk through and hike through with a big pack. Anyways, it's probably like at I don't know, 7,500 feet or 8,000 feet or something. And I was sleeping at night in the tent, and it pitch black out there, no headlamps out there, and volcanic rock that would be extremely hard to navigate in the nighttime. And I kept hearing something out there. It sounded like it was walking around, and I was like, "What in the hell is somebody doing out here right now, coming close to our tent?" And you can't even like walk through this stuff in the dark. And it sounded like it was getting closer, and I'm like, I'm just gonna get my headlamp and get out of this tent and see what the hell is going on, because it was freaking me out. And then I realized it was just ice breaking off by the
No.
glacier on the other side of the other side of the lake. Excuse me. But I was thinking, oh, what kind of supernatural thing is out here, or is it just a psychopath? I don't know. But
Yeah.
anyways, that was a relief. But that was kind of funny. If anybody's out there, sometimes ice breaking off can freak you out at night.
Yeah, and
But
to be sure, I mean, there's oftentimes like a guy sent in a picture of a trail cam. It looked kind of like a black cat leaping, and he sent it to me, and I did some image analysis on it, and it turned out it was just a crow in a weird position in its flight. How it was going. And it's kind of neat. Like, so not everything that we get reported is a cat. It's not like everything that we get in. And like your own story, like you went and you did some investigation.
yeah,
Interesting that you mentioned that. There's a place not far. It's maybe 20 minutes from the store, a little bit west. We call it Broke Leg Barrows. It's a 8,000-year-old lava flow. And these places, for your listeners who don't know, that I have been trained professionally in land navigation, and I don't think I could move through this area without getting hurt. But it's an area the size of the island of Manhattan in New York, so downtown New York City. And it is this labyrinth of razor sharp rocks that has got micro canyons and caves and everything. And it's this compasses don't work there, cell phones don't work there. And it's the kind of place where there are no even hiking trails in there because it's such an impassable, crazy landscape. And there are places like that, and people have gone missing in there. And so, yeah, there are really strange places, and places where things, we still haven't yet been able to explore.
yeah,
And they're right out there.
yeah. And I love these places. They're mysterious. They do have a bit of a sense of danger, but they also have a really good vibe to them quite
Yeah.
often, which is why I love hiking and stuff so much. I was
Interesting. We've
Yeah,
had,
go ahead.
like I said, close to 80 reports of this ape cat, no hostile encounters, which I think is just
That is
fascinating.
interesting, because when you think of cats, you think of carnivores, of course, and stuff, straight carnivores. But I mean, this thing apparently sometimes has an ape face, so who knows what's going on with that,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is super bizarre. And, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's related to an ape, but maybe it just has similarities for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Um, but I was gonna
That,
say, like, did you do people ever ask, like, is this a result of maybe some sort of experiment at the Hanford facility a long time ago, or something of that nature? Or I mean, like you said, the stories though of sometimes of these cats and other things go back such a long way that it may not be that.
well, the whole Hanford story is really fascinating. So, my personal journey is like, what the heck is this thing? Is there some kind of explanation that isn't supernatural? And I learned that there's the Hanford nuclear site. So during World War II, they spun up the Manhattan Project. Everyone knows about the scientists in Los Alamos designing the bomb down there in New Mexico. But in Washington State, the government basically took over a 600 square mile area, evicted all the residents, told the Native Americans they couldn't go in there anymore. And, they had burial grounds and fishing grounds and hunting grounds. And basically they closed it up to everyone. They built the Hanford nuclear site, which was the first industrial-sized nuclear reactor to build fuel for the bomb. And the very first bomb that was detonated during the Trinity test, the plutonium came from Hanford, and then the Nagasaki bomb came from Hanford. And then once the Cold War spun up, they produced enough plutonium to build 60,000 nuclear weapons. They called it the Apocalypse Factory. So this place was one of the United States' most important nuclear sites. And so when they started this program, the whole Manhattan Project, they were worried that the Nazis were going to unlock the secrets of the atoms before we did. And so they had the Nazis, of course, everyone's worried about the bomb, but there was also this concern the Nazis were creating super animals and super soldiers. So from day one, they had an animal testing program at Hanford. And the guy they chose to run it was a guy named Dr. Lorne Donaldson. And his only academic achievement before this posting was that he had created a super animal. It was called the Donaldson super trout, a fish that's 8 times larger and stronger than a normal trout, reaches sexual maturity in half the time, super survivable, could swim in fresh water and salt water. It's still a viable fish species today. Huh. And so he's the guy that they assigned to run the animal testing laboratory at Hanford, which of course is producing not just plutonium and radiation, but all kinds of exotic chemicals in the stripping process. Well, he eventually winds up getting assigned to the South Pacific, and he's at like the Bikini Atoll and the disastrous Castle Bravo tests. But he stays in contact with the next guy they put in charge, whose name is Bill Bear. And Bill Bear really sort of ramped up the whole animal testing program to the point during the Cold War where they could house 1,000 large animals at a time at Hanford. And to make a long story short, they're supposed to be testing, what effect does radiation have on livestock? Can you drink milk that's been irradiated, from cows that have been exposed, and, what happens to sheep and everything. But Bill Bear in I've watched now 3 oral histories that he participated in. And he says, tells a story in 3 of these different interviews about how they were testing alligators. They had 30 alligators there. And he even holds up a picture of the device they used to irradiate them. So we're talking about radiation experiments on apex predators, and how one night 6 of these 30 or so gators they had outsmarted the scientist and escaped into the Columbia River. And they spent months and months and months trying to hunt these things down. After 6 or 7 months, they had caught and killed 4 of them, but then they kind of gave up on the whole process, and they just figured the other 2 had died of natural causes. And so they've got these 2 irradiated experimental apex predators still swimming around in the Columbia. And he even talks about himself, how he would get questions from Fish and Wildlife guys asking him if he knew anything about alligators in the Columbia. He'd say no and hang up on them. And in the interview, he laughs about it. But so you got to ask yourself, why are they experimenting on apex predators at Hanford? There's no indigenous alligators in Washington State. We don't use them for meat. We don't, drink gator milk or anything like that. What's going on? Mm-hmm. Well, since 1958, the U.S. government has used dolphins to guard a quarter of our nuclear stockpile, because dolphins are much more effective at, like, if you've got a Soviet scuba diver coming in and trying to surveil or sabotage a nuclear site, sonar won't tell you if it's a tuna or a sea lion. You need something smarter than that. So they figured out they could train dolphins to identify divers. They would attach a sort of harpoon-like apparatus to their snout that train the dolphin to swim into the diver, stick that barb in, a balloon would inflate, it'd bring the diver to the surface, and the Navy would come scoop him up.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah. And so this is a program that was verified in the 1980s, but it had existed since 1958. And it's used to guard our most important nuclear sites, like the Bangor sub base up on the Olympic Peninsula here in Washington State. Well, Hanford has got 90 miles of river coastline that it needs to guard. And you can't bring dolphins into the Columbia River because it's freshwater, and dolphins don't swim in freshwater. They're only saltwater creatures. And so these cold warriors are trying all kinds of crazy things. They already recognize that a guard dog, a sentinel dog, is the same value as 10 human soldiers in terms of guarding and protecting things. So they know that they're having success with the dolphins. They're going to ask themselves one simple question: what's the world's most effective riverine hunter? Like, is there an animal that we can train? You might try alligators, but turns out the most effective riverine hunter is a black jaguar. So these creatures can hold their breath for up to 15 minutes. They can swim a kilometer in the open ocean. They have night vision 6 times better than a human being. They can kill caiman alligators with a single bite to the back of the head, pound for pound. They're the strongest of the big cats, and they always instinctively drag their prey to shore. And so a dead Soviet scuba diver at the bottom of the Columbia River does nothing for you. You don't gather any intelligence. You want that thing, you want that diver, his body, where you can gather intelligence from it, right? And so what we think that they may have done was they were experimenting on, can we train a jaguar to be a sentinel creature here at Hanford? We've got this river coastline that we need to guard. This is the world's most effective river coastline hunter. Let's see what we can do. They may have been doing experiments. We know that Donaldson was creating super animals. And so just like the alligators, these jaguars, maybe they were enhanced in some way through their testing, may have also outsmarted the scientists and escaped into the wild. When you look at Hanford's location on the map, if you were to go north, east, or south, you just go deeper into desert. If you head west into Klickitat County, there's all this available. I mean, basically the image behind you shows this, beautiful forested land, lots of available habitat, lots of food sources, all kinds of things. Number of our reports say that these creatures are completely unafraid of humans, but they don't attack them on sight. And if you did have a sentinel program, you'd absolutely train the creature to be desensitized to human beings, not attack them on sight, and only attack during a certain trigger, right? So they wouldn't be afraid, but they wouldn't naturally attack people unless whatever command was given. And we've had reports of a young cub. So a guy saw the cat in his driveway, big black cat in his driveway, and it had a young black cub with it. And so, to me, if you're not going to evoke some type of supernatural explanation as to why we have big black cats here in Washington State, which is 1,000 miles outside of the range of a black jaguar, this notion that they may have escaped from Hanford is a pretty reasonable story.
And with an ape face.
Yeah.
Maybe it escaped and mated with a Sasquatch, and there you go. You got a 10-foot tall ape cat.
Yeah. Since that first report, I've talked to some other folks, and they more helpfully said, well, the face is more flattened. So you can imagine like the difference between like a German Shepherd and a pug dog, how like one has just got a shorter snout. And so it may be a reporting error. And again, like only a handful of reports have that ape-like face. So who knows? Could be part of their, whatever genetic program they had. We do know that if you breed a lion and a jaguar together, you do get viable offspring, and they're basically gigantic lion-sized black-coated cats.
But they got ligers out there that are the offspring of tigers and lions, which you think is just a mythical creature, but they're out there. They're pretty big, but it seems like they're not quite as well adapted for the environment, for life and being as healthy. But nonetheless, they're huge and they're out there.
So we don't know, but so like I said, there's some people think that that's too tame of a story, like it's too point to point easy, and the notion that there actually was the giant cat, the panther atrox, alive during the Ice Age. Some folks are saying that, well, out at Hanford now, so they closed Hanford down in the 80s. We had already built enough nuclear material. The Cold War was kind of coming to a close, so they started closing down Hanford. It's actually North America's biggest cleanup site, but they still use that area for scientific research. And this facility is there called the LIGO, which stands for the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Observatory. And it was basically these 2-mile-long vacuum tubes set perpendicular to each other in the desert. And the purpose of this device is to find anomalies in the space-time continuum. I'm not making it up. It's what it says on their website.
Yeah, I never heard of that either. It sounds like some Hadron Collider stuff or something.
Yeah. And so a week after turning it on, they found anomalies in the space-time continuum. So I'm not saying that the LIGO they were using that to do something related to these cats. What I am saying is they are absolutely, the Department of Energy, which runs that facility, is researching, multiverses, hidden dimensions, all these kind of things. They've admitted to it in public and Freedom of Information Act requests. And so they may have pulled this thing out of time. Like there's like nothing is sort of off the table in terms of combining science with, the hidden dimensions, and where these things came from, who knows? But to me, it's just fascinating.
Yeah.
It's super fun to research and sort of be at the center of here in the gorge.
I need to ask you about that area there, above your right shoulder, the dark divide between Mount Adams and Mount St. Helens. People refer to it as the dark divide, I hear often. And it seems to be also a hot spot, the same kind of area, the same area you're in pretty much, but a hot spot, I hear, for Sasquatch and other things. Do you get a lot of stories coming out of that area between there? Because I know there's not really any main roads or really any Forest Service roads, are there? Too much?
Yeah. So I pulled up on the screen here the map that you're talking about. So this is a map I drew myself. I'm kind of a Dungeons and Dragons nerd, so living in a cool mythical area like this, I wanted to draw it, and we placed many of the sightings we've got on the map. But you're talking about the area between Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams, the Gifford Pinchot National Forest.
Yeah.
So that area up there, we've had tons of Sasquatch sightings. But one of the ape cat sightings came from that area. I talked to a fire crew chief, and her team was out there on a 3-day deployment, going to fight the fires. They encountered a big black cat with an ape-like face on their first day, and they were wondering what they would do if it wandered into their camp. So yeah, this area up here, so Mount Adams has over 200 volcanic vents around it alone, as does Mount St. Helens is very similar. So this whole area has got cracks into the earth. It's riddled with lava tube caves. It's high waterfalls, thick forest, and the Pacific Crest Trail goes through there. But it is a wild area, and we definitely get reports out of there for sure.
I like the names you put on here. You got some cool names there. I wouldn't mind it be called Portal Peak also. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah. We've had so obviously there's that story about the hangar door that opens on Mount Adams.
Oh yeah, tell us about that. Yeah.
So I'll pull up a picture. So people at East Ranch, and in fact, we get reports in the store, people who have views of Mount Adams from their porch say that a physical door opens on Mount Adams and things fly in and out of it. And so this is an image of that phenomenon right there at this sort of lower sub peak.
Yeah.
And so a guy came into the store and he said, I got to tell you about a portal I saw near Mount Adams. And I kind of jumped the gun and said, oh, you mean like the hangar door that opens? Said, nope, nothing like that. This was floating in the sky off to the side of the mountain, and it looked like, to his eyes, a piece of sky that was different than the sky around it. And so he thought that, and this is up on the screen is a AI render of what that might have been like. But basically, he thought it might have been something wrong with his eyes. So he drove in his car to a different location, rubbed his eyes, and he continued to see this apparent hole in the sky right next to the mountain. And we've had other reports of people encountering what they call portals or holes, that it's basically a place that looks different than the background behind it. And so the idea, in terms of that map, to me, the fun of it was, we left all of the town names accurate to their actual town names, but a lot of the geographic features we took a little bit of poetic license with to have some fun with it.
So that picture you just showed us there of the mountain, and that zoomed in spot there, the cropped
Hmm.
image of where the portal maybe is that the actual um spot where people have claimed that there's a like a door or whatever that
Hmm.
will open on the mountain? Is this the actual spot here? I can see it here. It looks like a little rectangle.
Yep, yep. So that's the reports we've received in the store. I talked to another person who was staying at ESETI Ranch. For your listeners, ESETI stands for Enlightened Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence,
Hmm.
and the folks there claim to be in contact with a number of non-terrestrial races of beings. And so, interestingly, one of those races of beings is a race of feline humanoids, and in fact, it's so prominent that there's a big cat in their logo. But
Hmm.
yeah, so this is where the hangar door is supposed to be located. It's sort of on the western sub peak of Mount Adams. Yeah, and
That
but
looks
other
like a
folks,
sorry,
what was it?
go. Oh, I was just going to say that that looks like that would be a very difficult spot to access, like for a mountaineer or something. Like it's not along
Mm-hmm.
the ridge or a flatter spot along Mount Adams. It's like one of the sub peaks or whatever, and it's like a cliff face.
Yep. Back when I was a mountain guide, I've been up Mount Adams a couple of times, and yeah, that is not on any route, and it's not an easy thing. And sometimes that dark rectangular hole is not there. Like, and so the story and the reports say that the door closes and opens. And like I said, we've had people who have seen it from their porch, and they watch things fly into it.
And
Um,
that's unbelievable. And these people that have seen this from their porch and whatnot, like are these people who have just come in and told you about these stories, or they people,
mhm.
not that it matters, but are they people you know, or like how often have you heard that?
It's a handful of folks, but yeah, uh, and it's probably happened two or three times. People who live in the area talk about it. I talked to a whitewater rafting guide, and she said that um, six of her coworkers saw a large egg-shaped craft in the sky, and they watched it for 45 minutes. Um, and so, to me, like we get these reports, and many of them are multiple witnesses. Some of them have photographic evidence. And so it's hard to dismiss it as just some kind of mental phenomenon. There's definitely something going on out here.
Yeah,
So,
and for those listening on the podcast apps, like we're talking about Mount Adams. It's over 12,000 feet, enormous stratovolcano. I believe it's actually even bigger by volume than Mount Rainier. And this is a long way up where this potential portal door would be. This is probably at least 11,000, 11,500 feet,
yeah.
and very hard spot to access. You can tell just by looking at the picture. But I mean, it's food for thought. I mean, nothing's off the table here on this podcast, man. We'll get into as weird as it can be.
Hmm.
But I was going to ask you too, that story, of course, is gonna remind some people about Mount Shasta and the wild stories that come from there with the supposed uh, portals in the mountain and the strange disappearances and the some people think, of course, the people or civilization or city, I should say, that's inside or
Hmm.
underneath the mountain. I think they call it Telos. Um, and that's getting as woo as you can get, as they say. But um, I don't know, sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire, or there's a grain of truth to something. Who knows exactly what's true for sure?
Yeah.
But that does remind me about Mount Shasta as well when I hear these stories. And I've heard this idea before about a portal being a physical, I shouldn't say portal, but like a physical door, so to speak, on Mount Adams.
Hmm.
And I will say too, you mentioned earlier about how ESETI, there's some people that claim they're in contact with some like feline looking kind of race or whatever of extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings. I have no idea. Um, of course, stuff like that gets more and more hard to believe for people, even for people who believe in Sasquatch and whatnot. And that's expected. I will say it was funny when I stayed the night there. I stayed there for like 3 nights, I think. And this was before I even really knew anything about their feline humanoid stories or whatnot. And it was the first or second night I was there, and I had a really vivid dream. I was staying in one of the buildings there, and in my room, and I dreamt that I was in some sort of dark room, like pretty dark, but with a kind of a low bluish glow in there. And there was this rather large humanoid lion looking being in my dream. And at first I looked at it and I had just an overwhelming sense of like whoa, like this is kind of freaky, this is kind of like scary. Like I had this sense of like power emanating from this being. And nothing really happened in the dream, but eventually I think I calmed down a bit in the dream, and I just remember seeing this thing and nothing was really going on, and then the dream ended. But uh, and then I learned about this stuff afterwards, and I thought, well, that's kind of weird. Now I can't say for sure if I had heard something about this feline humanoid type stuff before I had the dream. I don't really remember, but it was a very vivid dream, more vivid than normal. And I thought it was kind of strange that I had that when I was there at the East Eddy Ranch.
Yeah, again, it's we've got our normal state of consciousness, and that is effective in for us to maneuver around in the everyday physical world. And many of these experiences, especially these paranormal type of experiences, happen in an altered state of consciousness where you've either ingested some type of botanical, or you're under some kind of physical duress, or you're in in between a sleep state and a awake state. And they're remarkably consistent across time, across cultures. When you sort of sift out for cultural bias, the core of many of these stories, like the alien abduction experience, is very, very similar to the Fae or fairy abduction experiences, where they're, forever taking lovers and having Fae children or hybrid children, very similar to the UFO abduction experience. And then very similar to the shamanic experience, where many shamans go into the spirit realm and take wives or lovers in the spirit realm. Their hybrids are born and things of that nature. So there's something going on there that is deeply enmeshed in the human experience and has been that way for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. To wave them away with the hand saying, oh, it's a bit of indigestion or some type of hallucination or you made it up, I think is a sign of a very uncurious mind. And, it really doesn't explain anything. It simply puts it off to the side so you don't have to think about it anymore. But it really doesn't bring us any greater understanding. It doesn't move humankind forward in any way to say there's nothing to it. So
Yeah,
but yeah, we're coming up on an hour and a half here, and I just feel I mean, we could talk forever.
it's gone by quickly for sure.
Yeah.
I was gonna say before you got to go, whenever that is, if how much time do you have right now?
I'm coming up on my limit here.
Okay, sure. Maybe I'll just go over just a couple quick notes I had. Maybe if you want to give some short
Sure.
responses. Um, I was going to ask you about Beacon Rock, that unique rock along the Columbia River Gorge. I've heard some strange stories about it. What do you know about that?
Beacon Rock is definitely one of the hot spots. So Beacon Rock is 840 feet tall, and it is about 54,000 years old. It is the cold core of an ancient volcano. We've got a picture of it up here on the screen. And so it arose, and then the floods came through and scoured away all the topsoil. So it used to be sort of like a cone, and now it's just this monolithic rock. Some say, depending on how you define it, it's the second largest monolith in the northern hemisphere. There is a trail that's been built basically on the cliffside, and you can get to the top. It's a really fun and easy hike, super exposed, but there are railings and everything else. We've had many reports of glowing orbs around Beacon Rock, and so it's a hot spot in that regard. I've talked to maintenance workers who say that they have seen ghostly apparitions at some of the trailheads. We also know that spirit totems, wooden spirit totems, were found at the base of the rock in the early 1900s. And there was a guy named Biddle, and he and some business partners had purchased the rock. Like this is back in like 1915, 1912, that kind of time frame. And they were going to blow it up and turn it into gravel to be used on the railways. Like that was their economic interest in it. And Biddle actually bored three tunnels into the base of the mountain, and they were going to pack those tunnels with 200 tons of explosives and blow up the rock.
What?
Well,
Oh
the
my
story
God.
goes that Biddle put those tunnels in, and then he spent an inordinate amount of time in the tunnels. And then he came out and he bought out his partners, and he constructed that trail by hand to the top of the mountain. And the reason why he bought out his partners is so that no one could ever harm the mountain and do anything with it. He eventually wound up selling it to Washington State for $1 so that it would be protected in perpetuity.
Wow.
And to me, what's fascinating about that story is here's a guy fully engaged with the economic interest, um, you know, greedy as any other businessman might be. And then he went inside of this rock, which is literally a live wire connected to deep within the earth. And he spent time in those caves that he had dug to destroy the rock. And something changed him.
Yeah.
And he then became the rock's most fierce protector. And the idea that the experiences that you have in the wilderness can affect you and that you allow them to change your life, to me, like that's of all the supernatural phenomenon, I would call special effects between glowing orbs and ghostly apparitions and other strange things, this notion that whatever is going on here is something that if you allow it can deeply affect you and change your life. To me,
Yeah.
that's probably the more interesting story.
Again, centered around an interesting volcanic structure,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
so many other stories. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and what else was I going to ask you about here? Um, yes. Uh, in terms of portals, have you heard anything about any portals aside from the one on Mount Adams?
There is an area probably 12 minutes by car from the store. A town is called Lyle. It's where the Klickitat River, which is basically runs off the Klickitat Glacier on Mount Adams, flows into the Columbia. And so we've had people say they were driving along Highway 14, which is the road that runs in front of our store, and through the gorge on the Washington side. And they claim to have seen portals there at a place called the Lyle Gap. So when those floods came through, there were certain areas that were constricted, and so the flow was extremely heavy there. Like just imagine that the walls of the gorge are closer. And anyway, so we've had reports of portals in that area that they witnessed driving by in their car. And then when you get up on the Lyle Plateau, which is just sort of like you can walk around on the flat area above where the cliffs kind of lead to, that area feels otherworldly when you're up there.
Hmm.
We've had reports of portals at a Horse Thief Butte, that place that I was telling you about, where I saw that creature swimming in Horse Thief Lake. And then there's also a series of caves called Natural Bridges area. It's a lava tube, and certain portions of it have collapsed. And so there's probably 5 tunnels in that area. And we've had people report time loss and things of that nature, portals in that area as well.
Interesting. Okay. Nice. And by any chance, I know it's further north from where you are. You ever heard any stories about surrounding Mount Baker? Strange stuff?
My expertise kind of ends at Mount Adams.
Oh,
And
okay, okay.
yeah,
Fair enough. Okay, last thing I'll ask you then is do you have any, uh, what's the strangest, most far out story you could share that maybe either you've had or you've had somebody tell you about that maybe you don't always talk
Mhm.
about all the time?
Well, yeah, like I said, there's a number of one-offs. Y- So I will tell you that we hear stories about little people, and the one that scratches my head is, my employee who saw that strange um, praying mantis-like creature. What's interesting is that so in that same stretch of road, it's sort of in a channeled scablands area. So there, it's like desert, but there are these strange rocky outcrops all over the place formed by the flood area. It's called Dalesport. It's close to Horse Thief Butte, and that route is on his way home. And numerous times before that event, he had seen owls standing in the road, just standing there.
Really?
And owls, like if you think about, oh, even Harry Potter, owls are deeply associated with magic and wizardry in Europe. The same goes true for Native Americans. Owls are considered emissaries between the spirit world and our world.
Mm.
Um, Also, interestingly, owls are often seen before, during, or after alien abduction experiences.
Hmm.
Um, and so he had seen owls standing in that same place on that same stretch of road in the desert numerous times before he saw this strange creature. And again, like to me, like most of the creatures we hear about are, things that could be like some form of an animal that already lives here, like, the ape cat, some type of cougar, or, even Sasquatch could be a hairy man, um, or like the snakes or these different types of creatures. But this thing, you know, a bipedal thing with a praying mantis like head, that's one that, you know, is sort of out of my, like, I can't make sense of how that fits into any of this.
Yeah.
I drove out there in my rig and looked for tracks, did some EMF readings. I did find some owl pellets in that area. But yeah, that one is the one that, and again, this is an employee. He's actually the most senior employee. Been working for her. He worked for my mother-in-law, and I know him well. Not the type of person who's gonna one day come up with a story. Like, he's heard dozens of stories of his own, not one to make stuff up. And he has this encounter, to me, highly credible. I really can't, if no one believes it, well, that's their own thing. But, somebody that I know, worked with for years, comes in with a tale one day that's that outlandish. Like, that's one that I don't have any kind of frame of reference to put that into context. So that's
Yeah.
one of the weird ones.
Yeah. Insectoid humanoid. Wow. Yeah. So many interesting and strange stories in the Pacific Northwest, down where you are with the Columbia River Gorge. It was good to learn more about that area. There's a lot of that stuff down there I didn't know about in along the gorge. I got to do some more hiking and some more venturing down there. I've been down there a little bit, but I got to do more.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, the stuff around all the stratovolcanoes from Shasta to Adams and Rainier and above. There's so much going on. Anyways, James, thank you very much for coming on and devoting all that time today on the
Mm-hmm.
mystical mountain. Today, the one behind me, Mount Adams, that truly is a mystical mountain for those listening. Um, why don't you just tell us, where anybody can find any of your stuff or the store's website and things of that
Mm-hmm.
nature?
So margiesoutdoorstore.com, or just margiesoutdoor.com also works. And that's our primary website. We've got, I think there's a video about the ape cat up there and some other stuff. We also are on Facebook at Margie's Outdoor Store, Instagram, Margie's Outdoor Store, YouTube, Margie's Outdoor Store. So those are the primary places to find us.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, definitely. Go check that out and go check out your store. I'm gonna have to come down there and check out your store when I get down there for sure.
Yeah,
I
we'd
want
love
to.
to have you visit.
Yeah. Might have to register one of my stories there. So everybody listening on the podcast platforms or here on YouTube on video, thank you for tuning in once again. I'm trying to crank out some more podcast episodes, and the Mystical Mountain should be available on all your main platforms, including Apple and Google and Spotify and iHeart and the whole 9 yards. Oh, and we're also on Rumble and BitChute, just in case YouTube gives us the axe for no reason whatsoever. You never know what's going to happen on YouTube. Anyways, okay, James, thank you very much for being on here. And for everybody listening, go check out his website and his store. And please leave a like, even if it's thumbs down, that's fine. And a comment, and subscribe if you like it, and share this thing everywhere. All right, James, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.